أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون صدق الله العظيم. So this Quran is the source of all wisdom. Everything that is valuable knowledge for our lives is present in the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And people who are away from this knowledge, they wander in the darkness and they have strange ideas which could easily be resolved by looking at the Quran. But today darkness has spread in the world and even the Muslims don't know the message of the Quran. So we have a situation where lots of things which are simply easily known to be false are widely believed to be true. So one of these is the theory of Karl Marx, which is known as material determinism. And what Karl Marx says is that there are certain economic relationships which have to do with how things are produced, relations of production, and then who gets to use them, what is produced, all of the major questions of economics. He says that these relations are indispensable, which means that you can't live without food, they're necessary, independent of their will. It doesn't matter who I am, what I want, so it doesn't, these are not, and my personal will doesn't have anything to do with the relations of production. And so basically the relations of production are determined by the material productive forces, if there are tractors or land or etc. So these are material forces which are not determined by our thoughts. So the relations of production creates the economic structure of society, and this is the fundamental thing. Everything else is on top of that. The political relations and the social relations and the even the morality and our thoughts, everything depends on these economics. So this is the fundamental, and everything follows from that. So that's basically the material aspects of life determine the social, the political, the moral, the ethical, everything else. So it is not that how we think about the world that determines the way we organize life, but actually the how the society is arranged, that determines what we are, the consciousness. So we can look at three methodological ideas. Modern economics, the thing that is studied in all the universities other than this one, in economics, is that says that basically material is all that matters. Humans are out of the picture because human beings are just maximizing robots. They have no feelings, they have no thoughts, they have no ideas. They just calculate and they make decisions. So they're subject to mathematical laws. You can predict to the last inch what every person will do because they are just robots. So their ideas don't matter. But Marx is not that stupid. He says that there are economic structures and they determine everything, but actually even that's a loose determination. It's not deterministic. But once you have these relations of production, then the political structures form around that and the social structures form around that. Now the thesis that I am pursuing is entanglement, which means that material circumstances shape our lives, but also our thoughts shape the material circumstances, and there is lots of evidence for this relationship in the Quran. So we start with an example of the Feudal Society. It's a very good illustration of Marx's thesis. So on the first, the production relationship is that of farming. It's not. Is the hunter-gatherer society is pre-farming, where people hunt and they gather food. There is no farming. Now there is a lot of uncertainty in the agricultural life. So we have people who are farmers, but farmers are not warriors. And at that same time, there are some people who are warriors. So now the warriors need food. So where are they going to get the food? Well, they're going to rob the peasants, or anyway get their food from the peasants by violence. So it is natural. The relations of production lead to the concept that a peasant, instead of being subject to being robbed by random warriors, he attaches himself to some warrior, that you protect me and I will give you food. Now, so this is the but actually one warrior cannot protect, because groups of them band together. So we need large groups. So this is the basic structure of feudal society. There is a lord and he has vassals. The vassals are the landlords of individual plots of land. And the vassals swear their loyalty to the lord, and they swear to provide him with military service. In return, the lord gives them a land grant, and he says that, okay, you can, and the peasants on that land also, they belong to the vassal. So there's a hierarchy. The peasants have to feed the vassal of the lord, and the lord can ask for him for military service and also some taxes, so that he can also eat. So this is a more or less an illustration of Marx's ideas, that there are some basic economic relationships which are driving the structure. Now in this structure it's obvious that the vassal is subordinate to the lord and the peasants are subordinate to the vassal. It's dictated by the economics of the situation. So also the certain code of ethics, etc., also these will come in, because they are naturally tied to the feudal society. So that's what I have written on this slide, that we have already covered this. So the structure of production relations creates the political and social structures as a superstructure which is built on the economic foundations of the society. However, feudal societies were in existence all over the world, in particular in China, in our own area, in Turkey, but there are very large differences in social structure, so it's not a deterministic relationship. I mean, between these economic necessities, so the Sharia says that everyone is equal before Allah, and for every duty that you have a right. So if a person has a duty to serve the Lord has the duty to protect him. So there is a balance between duties and responsibilities. And then there are laws that the best leader is the one who is the servant of the people. So there is a social responsibility that is attached, and this social responsibility can also be enforced by the Sharia law. And also custom itself is a good guarantee. So in Islamic countries we have many examples where the king has been brought forth before the court, because the king is, and there is no such example in Western society. So what I am saying is that the economic relations of production do not actually ensure a particular social structure. The ideas of human beings can also play an important role in determining the social structure. So in our Islamic conception, the person who is sweeping the bathroom in the masjid, he is providing a great service to Allah. He is not that we don't have to look down upon him, that he is a very lowly person, in fact. And so, in fact, the Sufia, when they take disciples, they ask them to do menial jobs so that they will lose the pride. So the ideas are just as important in determining social structures as the material relationships. So after this, now today our main goal is to cover what actually happened in Europe, because in the 19th century is very crucial, because in the 19th century, basically in the 18th century you had pre-capitalist societies, and basically the transition to capitalism took place in the 19th century. So how did this happen? What happened? And what were the things? These are this is what economics is about. What I'm trying to teach you is meta thinking, one level higher thinking. There is thinking, which is you take a thought and you ask, is this true or is this false? But meta thinking involves thinking about the thought. Who has thought this thought? Why has he thinking this thought? Where is the history? Where is the historical context which led to this thought? I mean, suppose we say that let's talk about democracy. The question is, has everybody always been talking about democracy? Of course not. There are many places where democracy is an unknown concept. So now what is the historical context which leads us to think about democracy? What are the forces who are the people who are interested in having this concept spread? Who are the people who are against this? Whose interests are affected by this? So this is meta thinking. So in economics, free trade is one of the very important concepts. So we can organize this discussion around that. So basically, as Bayrock writes, that basically in the 16th, 17th, and up to the middle of 18th century, we have the golden era of mercantilism. Mercantilism is basically, as we have already discussed, it's the attempt to get gold, and trade is not by itself an useful thing except as a means of earning gold. And gold is important because you need it to finance your armies. And basically the driver of the economy is warfare. Whether you are kill or be killed, it's the law of the jungle, which prevailed in Europe for centuries, continues to prevail today. So, but towards the end of the 18th century, we have some people, like there's the physiocrat school in France and Adam Smith in England, who are starting to propose ideas of free trade. Now, this doesn't happen by itself. There is some change in the society which has taken place. And basically, the change which has taken place is the emergence of industry. Before 1760s, you only had agriculture. Land is the only source of wealth. There is no such thing as industry. Now, for the first time, when there is an industrial interest, then the industrialists are producing a lot of surplus, and they would like to have bigger markets. So there is a natural interest in free trade which is developed, and so these people start thinking about free trade. And there was a treaty, 1786 commercial treaty, which allowed trade between England and France, and was also taken as a model for Europe. Adam Smith himself was a very big hit. His book was translated into many languages, and it had many editions. And so his ideas were important in shaping history. At that time, I mean, this free trade, etc., is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the world and most of the countries are still basically mercantilist, but a little bit of trade thinking has come into the world. So it's now an idea that is coming in early off, and it is the idea is going to make a big difference. So what happened when these free trade ideas started floating and people started proposing? So basically what happened is that the countries which were behind Britain in industrialization, Britain had a great lead over all other countries, they started to produce arguments for protecting their industries. So Alexander Hamilton in USA imposed tariffs to protect industries in America. In France, there were economists who argued that we must protect our industries from England. And in Germany, Müller and List. List is the most famous of them. He created the German national system. The German national system was not just protection. It was a way of, and he saw that we are behind, and he said, how can we catch up? So basically he had a methodology in which education and research and industry would all be tied together for the production of useful knowledge. And so there were lots of very important ideas of List, which are actually still important. I mean, if you want to understand how a nation which is which is in the agricultural phase and wants to transition to industrial, then the ideas of List are very important, but these ideas have been forgotten because basically Germany became industrialized as a result of applying, and then actually even as List said that this protection and this is a temporary phase. It allows us to grow. Once our industries are ready, then they should and they can compete in the world market. So all countries have industrialized by using protection because there are large scale effects. So you can't start out at a large scale, and also there is learning by doing, experience is required. So either you never get an industry or you have to protect them because the competition is way ahead of them and they cannot survive in open competition. And this is clear. So while there was a start towards free trade in 1786, and from 1790 to 1815 there were Anglo-French wars, and so basically when you have wars then you can't have free trade, and more or less this meant that until early 18th century basically there's protectionist policy, and one of the important elements of this is the Corn Law of 1815, right, which was renewed. Actually, the Corn Law has been in place for many centuries, and the renewal is just to show that at that time the ideas of free trade have not made enough progress to allow the passing of the free trade bill. There was always, and at that time also, there was a big struggle between, basically the struggle is between industrialists versus agriculture. The Corn Law is a very interesting law. It's not a simple import duty. It says that if the domestic prices rises above a certain maximum level, then only imports of corn will be allowed. So on the one hand, you are trying to protect your domestic industry, but you are making sure that people have food to eat. So if there is a certain maximum, if the domestic industry either produces too little or becomes greedy and monopolistic, then you have an option, an outside option. So there is a balance between protecting domestic agriculture and keeping the price of bread low. So this law was renewed, which means that now the industry would like to have cheap bread so that they can feed the laborers and produce more. And also the Corn Law acts as once you have one barrier in trade, then this leads to other barriers. So if they remove trade barriers, then it will be beneficial for the industry. But the industry doesn't have enough power. So the Corn Laws favor domestic agriculture at the expense of industry. And there's industry is a newly emerging power in the economy, and there is a tussle between the agricultural landlords, which are the old powerful class, and the newly emerging class, the industry would like to have high import duties and low export duties. The agriculture want the opposite. They would like to have more goods from abroad, and they don't want the industrialists to export their goods abroad. They would like to buy them themselves. So anyway, these are all different fronts on which the battle is taking place. But the main obstacle to the industry from expansion is the Corn Law, which leads to a high food price and therefore high subsistence wage for the laborer, and that cuts into their profits. So they would like to have food available cheaply so they can feed their labor and make more profits. So the argument for the removal of Corn Laws, which went on for about 50 years, was made not on the grounds that we want more profits, but on the grounds that, look, our laborers are suffering, they can't eat. So this is very important to understand, that all the time in the world you will see arguments being made for very noble causes, but having a very different reality behind it. Like when America attacks Iraq, it doesn't say that we want to get control of the oil. It says that we want to get rid of an evil dictator and so on. Today, the industries in the advanced countries were threatened by imports from poorer countries where the labor is cheap. So they said that they created this child protection laws. Now the child protection laws is to create their profits, to protect their profits and to prevent imports from, but it is not justified in terms of profits. It's just when we are looking out for the welfare of the children by depriving them of jobs so that their families cannot eat. So if the child welfare law was driven by motivation for children, then you would say, okay, let's provide some opportunities to children, let's provide education, let's provide benefits so that the children don't have to work. That's never part of the child protection law. The child protection law just says, throw him out of the factory and let him starve. So there was a large lobby of industrialists, and you can see actually in the beginning of the 18th century, agriculture is about 2/3 of the British production, and industry is only about 1/3. But this becomes reversed in about 50 years, and exactly as this power of industry rises, so the pressure and the ability of the anti-corn lobby also rises. So the ideas of free trade also become more important. In 1842 there was another test. There was a lobby formed in 1838 and they tried to get their laws passed, but they failed again in 1842. Prime Minister Peel, who was actually quite sympathetic to the industrialists, reduced the import duties and allowed exports of machinery, which was all favoring the free trade. But they failed to push through the reform on the corn laws, and the agriculture still held to that power. But what happened was that in 1846, Irish potato famine happened. Now, the Irish potato famine is a horrifying episode in history. Free trade has always been a doctrine which has been selectively applied. You apply it when it's in your favor, and even Adam Smith, when he argued that we should have free trade, he said that, but we must protect our textile industry, and we shouldn't allow imports from India because it was superior. It had superior technology, cheaper products, so we have to protect the mills. So basically free trade is applied selectively in grounds where it's a weapon. You force it to open the Chinese that you must allow the free trade of opium, but when it's harmful to your interest, then you don't allow a free trade. So what happened in the famine was that throughout the famine, Ireland was exporting a large amount. It's not that there was no food in Ireland. This is the same famous Amartya Sen thesis about famine and poverty and famine. It is just that the idea of the free market, as promulgated by Adam Smith also, that you can get food only if you can buy it. These ideas had become widespread. You find that British statements say that if you try to help the poor, you are actually hurting the country, because if you give the poor food, then they won't work. So you should allow people to die of starvation, because so you have to, there are iron laws of the market we must obey. If we try to interfere in the market, it leads to worse outcomes. The same idea continues through the 20th century. Hayek and Friedman are making the same arguments, that if you interfere in the market, it seems like you are trying to help people, but you are actually going to hurt them. So it was a real horror story. 400,000 Irish men, women, child died of starvation while there was plenty of food available to feed them. And this food was shipped under British military guard, because obviously the hungry people would have been rioting and revolting that don't. But so there was a military guard. Same thing happened in Bengal also, by the way. All over the world where there were British colonies. So the most famine-stricken parts, you're taking huge amounts of food out and shipping it to places where people can buy the food. So this is a new conception of society. This is in the middle of 18th century, and we have basically the society has changed in the sense that the idea of the feudal society, that the rich have a responsibility to feed the poor, which is true in traditional societies all over the world. Anyone who has surplus should give from that surplus, and this is also written in the Quran. This idea has changed to the market idea, that you can get food only if you can buy it. So basically, as some historians said, the corn laws were washed out by the rain. It was actually unusual rains which led to the potato drought, and this was used as an excuse by English industry to push for the repeal of corn laws. Actually, that was not the corn law was not the issue. The issue was providing food to Scotland, which they never did. But they used this as a pretense that if we don't have corn laws, we will actually allowing for free import of food does nothing to help the people who are starving in the potato famine. They already have the food. So this is again an illustration of how ideas are, people make use of history to project ideas. It's not that the history directly implies the idea, but the power groups use incidents. The famine was used by the industrialists to get their end by appealing to the sympathy on behalf of the Irish starving people, while doing nothing to help them and getting their own interests. So from that point on, basically, 15th May 1846, repeal of corn laws, and that is the date by which we can say that the free trade era begins in England. Now from then on, basically England had a big advantage in industry over Europe, And so Europe were also aware. And so from then on, basically, Europe adopted what is called by Bayrock a defensive mercantilism. See, up to this point, mercantilism has been that we try to use our exports as a weapon, and we are protecting it. But now the England is now they are still using protectionist policies, but it's a defense against what England can do to them. It's not the original mercantilism, which is that this is the best policy for us to increase our wealth. They just want to avoid being invaded by English products and having their own industries wiped out. So this is the same policy, but for different reason. So from 1846 to 1860, Britain made a lot of progress. Its economic rate of growth was high. So, and it also had a lot of colonial power, and it had a lot of political power. So, on its own colonies, it imposed free trade. On others, it threatened to impose free trade. So, the free trade ideology advanced partly by political power, but also by ideological power. People said that, look, Britain is making such tremendous progress, and this is their theory, so it must be right. Exactly as today we say that, look, America is so far advanced and wealthy, so whatever they can say about economics, it must be true. We don't understand that the economic theory that they propose favors their interest against ours. And so this is actually the truth. I mean, very sincere, honest, capable, competent, efficient people who are looking out for the best interest of Pakistan, they follow theories which are harmful to Pakistani interest because they think this is the best theory for Pakistan. So the spread of ideology is due partly to the philosophical and ideas, again this is entanglement, partly to the historical factors. In practice, although it is true that in this period the free trade ideology became much more widespread, but the practice didn't change very much. On the ground, protection levels in Europe remained high. From 1860 to 1879, you can say that this was a European free trade era. As usual, all over the world, free trade is imposed on people by force. People understand that this is not in our interest to allow the industries to collapse. It increases. See, when you buy foreign goods, then this cannot be a good thing for the masses of the people generally, because local industry collapses and unemployment rises, people don't have money. But it helps a certain class of people. So that class pushes their agendas on the rest. So in France, Napoleon III bypassed the French Parliament, where the motion for free trade would have been defeated, and he got the law passed through tricks. And similar things have happened all over the world in the 20th century, where free trade agendas have been imposed by force. Chile is the biggest example, where the dictator Pinochet imposed free trade on Chile and destroyed their economy. So people who were ideologically influenced by England and people who stood to gain, they buy free trade in France. They formed a coalition and they enforced free trade on France. Once England and France came abroad, then a lot of other nations also joined the free trade bandwagon. And the methodology of this was the most favored nation treaty. Most favored nation treaties were just treaties which said that whatever concessions we give to other countries, we will give to you. So now if France makes a most favored nation treaty with Bulgaria, then since France has free trade with England, they will start free trading, and if different countries make such treaties with each other, it will spread. automatically. So that's what happened. So in 1875, which is sort of the height of the free trade era, these were the average levels of duties. And notice that US is still following a protectionist policy, 40 to 50% duty. And different countries are at different levels, with UK at 0 because it's the most advanced. In fact, you can you can roughly correlate the level of duty with the level of protection required by that kingdom. Also, ideology is involved here in determining these numbers. So both the amount of success in spreading the idea, so Germany is very close, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, these have very low levels of duty. Then there is a second, like Belgium has 9%, 10%. And then there is high like Portugal, and very high like US. But in 1879, basically Germany, which had been trying free trade for much longer than the rest, because it was very quick to translate Adam Smith and to jump on the ideological bandwagon, they found from their experience that it's not working. The agriculture and industry combined, the agriculture found that the hurt to them, the damage being done by the imports of agricultural goods is high, and the industry was also suffering by competition with the English industry. So both interests were united. There was no conflict. So there was Bismarck, who was a brilliant German politician, and he won the elections in 1879 or 1878, and then he passed laws to protect, and basically these were justified by the theories of Friedrich List. This is also important, that if you want to do something, you want to change policy, you have to have a theory to justify it. You can't just and so basically selling the idea, which requires having a theory, having a justification, is just as important as the political interest. As you can see throughout the world, people have an idea about what our interests are, but nobody can enforce his interests. I mean, generally speaking, groups are small, so they can't say that this is in our interest, so let us everybody do it. So they have to invent ideologies that this is the interest of everybody. Like the trickle down is the most famous example, that actually the policies which have been followed over the past 30, 40 years in UK and England and in capitalist societies have made the rich infinitely wealthy and have caused tremendous amount of damage to the poor. So if they had said, look, let's follow these policies because it's going to enrich the top 1%, nobody would have followed. So they said, no, these policies will make our nation wealthy and everybody will become wealthy. And a rising tide lifts all boats. And there is a trickle-down effect. If the wealthy are wealthy, then automatically the poor will also become wealthy, even though this is all garbage. And has been proven to be wrong many, many times. But the same theory keeps coming up because the rich cannot say that, okay, let's do this because we are rich and powerful and we will force our way upon everybody else. They have to create ideologies which allow other people to think that it is in their interest. So Germany went to protectionism, France went back to protectionism in 1892, and basically there were 10-year free trade treaties which have been enacted the most of it. When they expired, nobody renewed them, so basically they were so we're back to protectionist era in 1890s. So the free trade theories are charming in the books only, but they don't work in reality. The most famous theory is that of comparative advantage. Now this is a cooked theory. It was invented to justify free trade. It doesn't work in many different ways because it has sort of ridiculous types of assumptions. First of all, it assumes that capital is not mobile. If you allow transfer of capital, you see, then even the inventor Ricardo said that, okay, he argued about England and Portugal, that Portugal should produce wine and let textiles be produced by England because this is their comparative advantage. They should grow grapes. And he argued that even if Portugal has an absolute advantage, it can produce both things more efficiently, it should still produce the thing which is it's relatively more efficient at. That's because English capital is fixed in England. If English capital can be transferred, then somebody asked him about this, and Ricardo said yes, if Portugal has an absolute advantage, then it should produce both goods and export them to England, because that's if they can produce everything cheaply, then the industry should be set up there and benefit should be taken from England. So the argument itself depends on very strange and very strong assumptions. So labor and capital should be mobile within a country, but not across countries, in order to make this work. And if any of this assumption is false, then the comparative advantage theory fails to provide a justification. But these theories are very powerful even when they are wrong, because they are used to justify wrong policies. So the NAFTA agreement basically was of great benefit to the USA auto industry. They had a huge $1 million spare parts industry, because and the laborers, they had unions and they had high wages. So basically they shifted all of these industries to Mexico. It's called the maquiladora, American manufacturers. Now, according to the books, they show that NAFTA has been very beneficial to Mexico because it's producing now high technology goods which it is exporting. Actually, nothing like that is the reality. This is what is being shown, but हाथी के दांत जो हैं वो दिखाने के और होते हैं, खाने के और होते हैं. So this is the thing that what was happening was that the US industry is exporting parts to itself, so there were no linkages to the Mexican sector. This is one of the crucial problems, that the parts were being produced, they were advanced, but this was an enclave, an isolated enclave in the Mexican economy. It didn't have any backward linkage, it didn't have a forward linkage, it has no impact on the Mexican economy, except that it hired a lot of Mexican labor at better wages than were available in Mexico, but at dirt cheap wages compared to American wages. And there was no, these people just did jobs. They were not learning any skills of value to Mexico. There was no technology transfer. So basically this was just a thing which was harmful actually for the Mexican economy. But it was painted as a great success. Today, Chinese imports to USA have destroyed their jobs and impoverished labor, but they have helped the industries again, because they can produce their goods cheaply and they can sell them to the rest of the world, so they are not really concerned about the destruction of the domestic demand. So in the 1890s, basically there was a gradual return to protectionism, and 1913 is of course an important date because 1914 is the date of the First World War. So these are some of the things. This was 1 century of peace in Europe. This is where the Polanyi analysis began. But this here I am following the Bayrock. So in the 100 years of peace in Europe, actually what we have is 100 years of global conquest. The peace was due to the fact that European countries were out conquering the world and they didn't have time to fight each other, and nor was it profitable. I mean, why fight a powerful country when you can fight a weak country and conquer? So now one of the things that because again ideas and reality are very different, so the portrait which has been painted and which is widely believed is that the process of colonization was great for us, and Britain came here and they built our railroads and they gave us civilization. We were living in the jungles and eating in trees, and then we came down into the cities and they civilized us and they taught us manners, table manners, and taught us how to eat with spoon and fork and so on. The reality of the colonization was very brutal. Famine, I mean, millions of people die of food while food is being shipped from Bengal, and there is not one, multiple famines. And similarly, destruction of industry, and basically India was an industrialized country which converted to an agriculture country. India was a country in which there were universities all over the place, and it was the land of learning, and actually the tales of Indian wealth were spread all over the globe. I mean, actually Columbus was looking for the treasures of India when he sailed for. So now India is a poor country. Why? Well, because Britain impoverished the country. It was intellectual leader of the world. People came from all over the world to study in India because we had knowledges of all sorts. And there was free education. We had a system of education financed by Waqf. Actually, all three traditions, Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic, value education. So, in all of the traditions, the student, the scholar, was given great respect, and there was never any question that the person who sets out for search of knowledge, he needs to have any tuition money. If students were facilitated by the whole culture. Everybody was interested in feeding the students, taking care of them, taking care of their worldly worries so that they can devote their life to study. So it was freely available to all who sought education. So there is this important book, Global Rift, by Stavrianos, and he says that, you see, at this time you have lots of book on development, that what are the causes of underdevelopment of the, and so like famous historian Landers, he says that we in the East, we are lazy, we don't have brains, we don't have ethics, we rob and we cheat and we steal, and that is why we are underdeveloped. So what Stavrian, and that's just one, there are hundreds of books like that, all of them giving some explanation. We don't have property rights, we don't have this, that, or the other. We are in all such cases, basically we are inferior to the Europeans in some way or the other. So exactly what is the inferiority, that is the question which is being debated. So one of the most interesting one is Ajmeoglu. No, that's not the one. Timur Quran. He says that our inferiority was that we had a wonderful civilization, the Islamic civilization, had excellent laws, justice, everything was perfect, and that is why we could not innovate to keep up with and they had a very terrible culture and civilization, so they were able to change because what they had was so bad that they had to change it, but we could not change because we had perfect system already. So that's why we lost. And it's such nonsensical explanations. So what Starviano says is that development and underdevelopment, which is basically being rich and being poor, are opposite sides of the same coin. The Europe robbed the riches of the rest of the world and became rich, and we became poor. There's nothing very complicated about it. So, because the mainstream history is being told, the history is the conquest song of the victors, so we are not aware of how actually savage and barbarian these Europeans, because again, the Khane ke Dantar and Khane ke Dantar. So there is a portrait of high civilization, human values, and this and that. At the same time, you are killing by bombing millions of people, and you are talking about human rights and how you are so concerned about the saving the whales and trapped in the oceans. But while at the same time you are bombing and killing children all over the world. So one of the worst horrors was the Belgian Congo, in which millions of people died, and it was given to the king as a sort of a Christian charity, and so they were going out and trying to civilize the Belgian people. This was their mission. And how they did that was they taught them the work ethic. See, the Belgian Congolese were very lazy people. They didn't, and Europeans have the work ethic. They know it. So they took the wife and children of people hostage, and they sent the laborer to work, and he had to produce a certain amount of rubber in order to be allowed to come back. Otherwise, his hands would be chopped off, and he would be allowed to die. And they actually took those hands and by the thousands. And so basically about between 1 million to 15 million people died, and Belgium got a lot of rubber out of Congo to export to other countries because rubber was valuable. So because they were perpetrating atrocities all over the globe, so they were too busy to fight each other, so they had this maintenance of. So somebody has said that, you see, the vampires, they are sucking blood at the night, and the morning they have this very wonderful appearance. They're rich, and so people are deceived. So we now go to Polanyi's explanation for 100 Years of Peace. He said that 19th century European civilization was built on 4 institutions, and that's balance of power, gold standard, self-regulating market, and the liberal state. Now, so this is what is called institutional economics, that we analyze the economic structure in terms of the institutions which are underlying that social, political, and economic structure. All three types of structures interact with each other. So this idea of economics, that we can analyze economic structures in isolation, this is completely false. You cannot understand an economy in isolation from the politics and from the society. So these are the 4 institutions which we will explain. These are very peculiar to 19th century. They did not exist before, and according to Polanyi, they have been destroyed after. In fact, they have been destroyed afterwards. So this was a very special period in history in which these 4 institutions were operational. They said that of the 4, the self-regulating market, the idea that markets should be allowed to expand without any regulation, without any boundary, this has been always the battleground, and it's the battleground today. Should we regulate markets or should we not? And from the beginning, in Islam, regulation has been part of the market. That the Prophet ﷺ himself created the concept of hisbah. Hisbah is the idea of regulation of markets. So there is a very strict set of rules for markets present from 1400 years ago, which if followed today would have prevented all of the problems that arise with the markets. So the sad thing is not that they don't know, the sad thing is the Muslims don't know anything about it. That we have already the rules that are required for markets to function, while the whole world is arguing about whether or not markets should be regulated, and if they should be regulated, what the regulation should be. Nobody knows. And the people who are the carriers of the book, who have this knowledge, they don't even know, and they are also participating in these debates that yes, some people are saying yes, free market is good, some people are saying regulation is good, but they don't have any access to their own tradition which tells them the answers to this question. So the self-regulating market, see, what Polanyi says is that once you create a market society, automatically it tries to expand. Everything should be for sale. And you can see the effects that today in America you can buy a womb for production of your baby, and you can buy somebody's head for putting your advertisement on, and he will walk with your ad painted on his forehead, and many other such things. There is an article, What is for Sale, which lists all of the bizarre things that are for sale in the capitalist society. So the market tries to expand. The expansion of the market is extremely harmful to society. So society tries to protect itself. If this market is allowed to expand, then it will lead to destruction of man and society. Man will just become a commodity for sale, as he has already become. And society also. One of our friends was in the UK, and his professor was telling, why you Muslims are so backwards. You can't be engineers like us. He said, yes, you are right. I can never be an engineer like you. He said, why? Well, I mean, you are just as intelligent. He said, look, I have a family, I have my parents, I have society. You have no family, you have nothing else to do. You can work from morning to night on engineering. I cannot do that. I can never compete with you. So this is the case that if you destroy the family, you destroy the society. Man is just a production. And today, I mean, this is the thing, that the young man graduates and from morning to night he is programming or he is doing something, producing wealth for the capitalist, and he thinks that this is the meaning of life. Yeah, but life is not about making wealth. Life is about making enough so that you can eat, and then having a life, having family, having society, having friends. Today, actually, in my own life, we can see, I don't know, you're too young maybe, but in our youth, after you worked until the afternoon, when you came back, then you would go and visit family and friends and have a society. Today, there is no society anymore. You work from morning to night, and this is the demand of the capitalist society. Everyone must produce wealth. This is exactly what happened in Congo. They said, okay, you're teaching work ethic, you work from morning to night, produce rubber, and then you can visit your family. If you don't, then your hands will be chopped off. Today, life is like that everywhere. Similarly, because we are exploiting the earth, we will destroy the environment. Again, in traditional society, the relationship between man and land is one of Mother Nature. The land provides for us. It's a trust. It's given by God. It produces a lot of wonderful thing, and we take care of the land. It's not something that is for our exploitation. So this concept of Mother Earth, Mother Nature, this has been destroyed. It's just land is just something which we can use to produce wealth. Everything is just for sale. So, since a society and environment need protection from the ravages of capitalism, so some bound is put on the operation of the market. But when the operation of the market is bounded, then that disrupts the economic system, and so the market fights back. And so this is a continuous struggle in which the market is winning. So what Polanyi says is that the 100 years is driven by the market, and basically the market produces a huge amount of surplus, much more than you need, because it's all about eating, and as your economic theory textbook says, life is about maximizing your consumption. So you produce as many goods because there is insatiability. So now if you have produced a lot of surplus, then what are you going to do with it? Well, the best way is to have your colony. Then you can market your good. First you make sure that they are not self-sufficient. That's why you feed them this theory of comparative advantage, that you only produce the wool and you bring it to us, and we will make the clothes and manufacture, and we will sell to you. So actually, you see, Gandhi was protesting this, and he said that no, we will produce our own salt, and he created this Khadar movement that we can. They had destroyed the textile industry. The Indian textile industry in 16th century was producing very fine clothing, but at that time all of this industry had been destroyed. So he said, okay, we'll produce this rough homespun cloth which is very coarse, but we will do our own. And so he was imprisoned for this, and so on. Basically the idea is that colonization is one way that you can market your surplus goods. So first you have to destroy the society. If the society is self-sufficient, then they don't want your goods, and that's exactly what happened in China and in many places. They had nothing to sell, and so they had to create this opium war, that they would make people habituated to this, and then they would sell them the opium, so which they would grow in India, so that they could get some money. Silver, actually, one of the things, the reason for the opium war was that the Chinese would not accept anything. They didn't want any of the English goods. They only wanted silver. So the Chinese had lots of things that the English wanted to buy, but they had nothing to buy it with. So then they did this opium war, so they could sell opium to Chinese and get silver. From the silver, then they would buy the Chinese goods. So the market economy created this urge for imperialism and colonization of all of the globe. Then these other three institutions, the gold standard, the balance of power, and the liberal state, these are the accompaniments of the market economy, which basically attempt to spread the system throughout the globe. So the liberal state is basically a laissez-faire state. This is what the physiocrats, the term introduced by the physiocrats, that instead of regulating everything, and instead of having duties and taxes, and instead of having responsibilities, why don't we just let everything be on its own? So that's the liberal state, is basically the idea of laissez-faire. Don't do any regulation, don't do any interference. This is what suits the market economy the best, the self-regulating market. The gold standard is another. Now, if you want to trade between two nations, so actually this is a very important story that we will discuss later. At the end of this course, you will know a lot more than most people do about this. So, the question of what is money, this is a very important question. It's very complicated, so we'll discuss this later. But within a state, there is no need of gold. Fiat currency is just fine. As we can see today, there is no gold. The Pakistani rupee works without any gold. But fiat currencies cannot be used for foreign trade. I can't print a rupee and give it and buy somebody else's product, because rupee is fiat means by law. So my law is valid in my land, but my law doesn't apply to foreign lands. So now on the other hand, the dollar is the law of the dollar applies to all lands. So everybody in the globe will take a dollar, so that's actually one of the sources of the power of US. So if we want to understand monetary theory, we have to understand what was the gold standard, which we will, and then why did the gold standard collapse, and how did the dollar standard come into place, and how come, despite the tremendous advantages of the dollar to USA and the tremendous disadvantages to the rest of the world, it's still continuing. So part of the answer is because people don't understand what the system is. And why don't people understand what the system is? Because they are taught this ridiculous math and they are never taught history. So they never understand what monetary theory really is all about. They are taught these myths that money is an illusion, so don't think about money. Basically, the idea of in economists is wonderful at putting one blinder after the other. It makes you impossible to see what the reality is. It says money is a veil, so you don't think about money, and it says many things about money important. There is no land in the economy, and many other. So anyway, the gold standard is one way of organizing international trade. Now within a domestic economy, fiat currency is fine, but to trade across economies, you need something else. There are other systems other than the gold standard, which would be very useful, but for various reasons, the gold standard was the one that emerged in Europe at that time. Today, it's not that system. Today, the Bretton Woods and then dollar standard have emerged, and those have to be studied. But basically, we need something for international trade, and gold standard is a very simple and easy to understand system for international trade. So the market economy, when it wants to go international, it has to adopt the gold standard. The liberal state is again part of the market economy, and the balance of power. This is a very peculiar and very important European institution. It's very particular in history. Basically, you had a large configuration of powers. You had Europe, you had France, you had Germany, you had UK, you had Russia, Italy, Spain. All of these were powers. So the balance of power system was that whenever some state would go strong, basically it's, first of all, there's continuous warfare. So whoever is strong, he is trying to eat his neighbor. Now, so all of the people realize that if we let a powerful state eat up its neighbor, it will become even more powerful. So the weaker states would combine together to fight against the stronger power, and this is the balance of power. So no one state has enough power to eat up all the rest. So as long as the people combine to support the weaker power, no one state can gain dominance. So this is called the balance of power system. So World War II occurred when this whole system, all four of these institutions, broke down. And basically this system was destroyed and a new system emerged, and we will discuss this in greater detail. But what I want to say here is that what Polanyi is talking about is again a higher level of thinking or meta thinking, and we're not looking at the events X happened and then Y happened. We're looking at the deep drivers of history, the underlying ideas and forces which shaped history, which are not apparent in the superstructure. So we'll study that later. Currently we're just looking at the structure, the superstructure. We want to understand the events I'm not doing the Polanyi Alas today. So the 100 years peace is an unusual event. Actually, this is the first part of Polanyi. He's going over the same 100 years history, but slightly more, which we have already done. We have done the superstructure. We're going to do a little bit more exploration, little more depth. So he says, first of all, was there a 100 years peace, we are saying. So he says that look at, in 1815 to 1914, there was only about 18 months of war total. As opposed to this, if you look at the amount of wars between these powers, in the two preceding centuries, you get 60 or 70 years of war. So obviously there is something which has changed, and changed radically and dramatically. So why? So this is the question. Why is there so little fighting between the European powers in the 19th century? They made up for it by, in World War I and II, they did enough fighting to cover 1 century's worth of damage. So he says that it is not that the sources of conflict have been removed. So he says that there were civil wars, revolutionary movements, anti-revolutionary movements. In Spain there was this, and in Hungary there was that, and there was... So in the 19th century there were lots of battles, lots of troop movements, lots of internal dissent, and lots of conflicts between European powers, but somehow or the other these were all controlled. It didn't lead to war. He says this is a very strange event. Why did it not lead to war as it should have? So he says that despite all of these provocations, these reasons for war, peace was preserved, and it was preserved under a very different set of circumstances. It was not that the same mechanism was working well, but sometimes in the name of progress and liberty, sometimes in the name of authority of throne and church. In the early part, the throne and church were powerful, and they were used for peace, and in the later part, progress and liberty became the mottos of Europe, and these mottos were used to preserve peace. So he says that obviously it is not at this level that you can look for answers to why peace was preserved. If it was that the idea of progress and liberty leads to peace, then in the opposite circumstances you would not get peace. But actually, so all of these is just bahana. These are the surface appearances. The root cause for peace lies deeper. So sometimes by corruption they bribe people to fight, and sometimes by appealing to the morality that look, it's wrong to fight. So all of these different things are being used for the same purpose. It means that the driver of the peace is at a deeper level, not at this level. So he says that the balance of power mechanism was transformed. In the previous centuries, the balance of power led to a continuous sequence of wars. The big power would invade the weaker power, and then the weaker powers would come to the aid and protect it, and so the bigger power would get defeated, and in this process somebody else would emerge as stronger power, and then they would try to eat up their neighbor. So this is European thinking, continuous wars. So that is what happened with the balance of power. So the balance of power mechanism was a mechanism which would provide continuous peace with no victors. But now this same balance of power mechanism was producing peace. Why? Because of the emergence of a peace interest, which we will discuss. So this is a deeper level. And he says that, you see, in order to produce peace, he said that the new factor is haute finance, which is high finance in French. There were these lords of money, the Rothschilds and the bankers, and they had international commercial interests, and they were financing kings, and they were financing businesses, they were providing loans. And so it was in their interest to preserve the peace. They worked behind the scenes to, he says that, you see, if in order to produce peace, it's not enough to say, oh, let us wish that the world is in peace. He says you have to have some implementing mechanism, something, concrete has to be done on the ground. When people are bloodthirsty, so they want an excuse to create war. So you have to buy some people off, you have to persuade some people, either by the stick or by the carrot. And so this is what they were doing. They were bribing kings, or they were offering them loans to do their policies, or they were bribing businessmen. Because you say to prevent a war, you have to anticipate what's happening. So they have to have they had a global network of information, because wars are very expensive financially. So when people start mobilizing, for war they have to consult the financiers to get the money. So the information is always there. And since the 19th century was very sophisticated, they had stock markets, they had investors, and so fight between the European powers would have been very damaging. So the lords of finance worked behind the scenes to prevent them from happening. And they used whatever instrument was available. So in the early part of the century, there was the Holy Roman Alliance, which was based on, I think, Catholic, and they used this alliance, they manipulated this alliance to get their desired results. Later on, this alliance broke down, and there was this concert of Europe, which was a collection of powers, loose configuration, and they used this to preserve the peace. So they used whatever instruments were available to achieve the goal. So if you look at the superficial level, what is happening, then you cannot understand history. This is very important, because this is actually the mindset of the historians currently, that you can only look at the superficial level. You cannot look at underlying forces. So if you do that, then you lose the ability to understand history, because you are achieving this goal, but a large number of different things are happening. So if you look at the surface level, then you say, okay, the Holy Roman Empire has led to peace. That means that religion is a factor which produces peace. And then later on you find that the opposite is true, and then you say, what's happening here? And similarly, for every single factor, the same factor is sometimes producing peace, sometimes producing war, because it's not the reality. The reality is hidden underneath, and the people are using whatever tools are available to produce peace. So if the tool is the church is strong, then they use the church. If the tool is that the secular power is strong, then they use the secular arguments. Yes?
Sir, what about this role of intelligentsia under the militaries, like CIA and IBs, and to control indirectly and get the information from the people through informal means, and you have a...
Yes, this is all very important, but it's all 20th century. We are studying the 19th century.
But it happened during that colonial war.
There was no CIA.
But it was kind of army people, especially through British.
There was the great game that was being played between Britain and Russia. Yes, all of these are important, but we are just looking at the effects on the economy, so we have a very restricted focus. I'm not looking at all of history, which is huge. I'm just looking at those things which led to the development of economic theory in the form that it takes today. So the Rothschilds were the international bankers, and the statesmen and the investors, the two powerful forces, the governments and the industrialists. They all need the approval, the stamp from the Rothschild in order to carry out their policy, because they are giving loans to governments, they are giving loans to the businessmen. So these people were not moral people. It's not that they wanted peace. They were by no way peace-loving. But they were making money from wars and from extraction of resources by killing and murder. But the great powers should not fight each other because their assets were across all of Europe. They were an international setup. And so they didn't want to have power. So basically the profits were made by extracting resources from the rest of the globe, but while maintaining peace in Europe. So the gold standard was the methodology for international trade devised by the bankers, and the Pax Britannica, which is supposed to be the actual the peace that was enforced by, because Britannica, Great Britain was the greatest power in the 19th century, and so it was thought that the peace between Europe is being enforced by Britain, but actually it was not. The peace was actually enforced by the bankers, and they used the same techniques that they did today. There is conditionality of loans, that I will give you a loan only if you don't make wars, only if you behave according to what I say. So one thing that Polanyi says is that finance is not the strongest power even at that time. If the governments had wanted to go to war, they could have defied finance, but there was an interest, general interest in preserving peace. So these two things were combined. The political interests and the financial interests were together, and that is why there was peace. So basically then there is a relationship. I mean, there is the financial interest, that is one source of power, and then there is politics, which is a separate and independent source of power, and actually is the stronger source. So if there is a battle between the two, the political power, the armies will dominate over the financial interests. So the Dolma Bahçe Palace was built because he was embarrassed by the Topkapi Palace, which is in Istanbul, which is a medieval palace. It's very simple and actually according to the Islamic lifestyles. So instead he followed the European pattern of enormously luxurious palace, which cost so much money that the Ottoman Empire defaulted on public debt in October 1875. So in 1881, basically the Europeans took over the taxation and revenue of Turkey. In effect, basically taking over the control. I mean, if you control the revenues, then you control everything. So what Polanyi writes is that as soon as the default took place, immediately there were lots of battles broke out, because basically the trade balances were disrupted, and so very quickly the Europeans got together to prevent. Basically, this is the thing, that there is firefighting when the financial interests are different from the political interests. So when the financial interests failed, when there was some people defaulted on their debts, so then the political interests said, let's go to war to get back from by using of power what we have lost by financial means. So then the financiers simply quickly maneuvered to get them together at the table, and the Treaty of Berlin was passed. Was basically, let us break up the Ottoman Empire to and different countries received different pieces of the empire to compensate for the investments that they had made. So again, this is all, there's a complex interaction between money and power. Basically, now it's no longer about the political control, it's the financial control, that we had made some investments and now we are not getting it back. Today IMF is playing the same role, that the investments have to be protected. So the decree of Muharram in 1881 gave the collection of tax revenues to the European Debt Authority in Turkey, basically giving power to the Europeans over the Ottoman Empire. So in this period, all the wars were organized by the financiers. They financed the wars in order to take control of territories and to export and basically investment in Congo and all over Africa, in Latin America, in India, in Australia, all over the world. Wars and peace are financed by financiers. One of the things that when we are talking about, this is not something which is immediately apparent in the historical account. So Polanyi says that for the proof of this, look at what was happening to business during during wars. So he says that if you want to see the proof of this, look at the international law. In the international law, when the nations were at war, then business would get disrupted. But in the 19th century, it's not true. Even when two countries were at war, you would have business deals being taking place. And Spain and Spanish America were at war. Still, business ships were allowed to allowed to sail and carry goods from America to Spain and vice versa, as long as they had no weapons with them. So this shows how powerful the financial interests are. That even at and similarly, countries cannot. If you are at war with Spain, you cannot appropriate assets of foreign investors. And after the war, all debts must be repaid. So the financial, previously wars would be used to cancel debt. That okay, we have suffered so much, let everybody participate in the suffering. So everybody can participate in the suffering except for the international bankers. They must get their money back, regardless of war or peace. So all of these laws show the high finance is in control over politics, as opposed to politics being control over high finance. So he just shows that in the 18th century, he says that Rousseau is talking about how farmers have no patriotism, and the merchants are afraid of wars, and that they should be. So this was, patriotism and fighting for a nation is being proclaimed as an honorable activity. In the early 19th century, we find that these patriots, they are just idiots who are bloodthirsty, and so peace is now being promoted as an ideology. So the business interests, when war is in their interest, then they promote war. When peace is in their interest, so the ideologies that we see in the world around us are not truths; they are power. Basically, this is what knowledge power means. That what is the knowledge that is being transmitted is what is in the interest of the power to transmit. So in the 19th century, the business interests were paramount. Even in the course of wars, you must make sure that you don't damage business interests. So if traders are in your country and they are Spanish, there's nothing, you can't touch them. If an enemy citizen has given loan to if a Spanish person has given loan to an American businessman, he must repay and he must provide the interest payments. If an enemy merchant ship is in your port, he must be allowed to leave as long as it's on peaceful business. You can't capture the ship, which throughout all of history this was the case. Your enemy ship, whether it's business or peace, it is a property which you can use for your interest, so you capture it. This was no longer allowed by international law. So again pursuing the same thesis. Ooh, we have gone way over time. Okay, so I will stop here.